Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage author and radio host Larry Elder.
Are those real? Thank you so much for having me. Please, thank you. Watching this political season, I've never heard more discussion about systemic racism, institutional racism, structural racism, and Beto O'Rourke gave us a new one, foundational racism. Little experiment. Pick up your magic wand, wave it over America, and remove every smidgen of racism from the hearts of white America. It's all gone. Now, every white person thinks the way Mother Teresa does. The problems facing the black community still remain. Number one, absent fathers. 70% of black kids are brought into the world without a father in the house. Forget about Larry Elder. Barack Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. It is far and away the number one problem facing black America. Not systemic racism, not institutional racism, not structural racism, not foundational racism, the lack of fathers in the home. Now, what's caused that? I was in college in 1970. 1965, 5 years earlier, a report came out by a guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a lefty. He later on became a Democratic senator to New York. So he's not right-wing, not a neocon. He talked about the fact that at that time, 25% of black kids are raised without fathers. Now 25% of white kids are raised without fathers. About 40% of Hispanic kids are raised without fathers. Lyndon Johnson in 1965 launched what he called the War on Poverty and supplied all this money for people, provided there was no man in the house. The number went from 25% outside of wedlock to 70% today. If you look at a graph showing how much money we spent on welfare and a graph showing the increase in kids raised without fathers, they parallel. We spent $22 trillion since 1950 to fight the war on poverty, and poverty won. The second problem, if you waved a wand over America and removed all the racism from the hearts of whites, would be our public school system. 50% dropout rate in public schools in many of our towns. If you saw the movie Boys in the Hood, my high school was that movie, Crenshaw High School. Right now, front page article, LA Times a couple years ago, 3% of kids at my former high school can do math at grade level. Not a typo, 3%, up from 2% the year before. One party wants to allow parents who living within that geographical area of that high school to have an option out, to be able to go to a better school. One party, a party that is aligned with the teachers union, wants to compel you to send your kid to a school where only 3% of kids can do math at grade level. And by the way, it is a Crip school. Crip School is one of the big gangs in LA. The reason I know that is because Ice-T, 10 years after I went to my high school, went there, and he chose it because he wanted to go to a Crip school. Now suppose you are a parent, you don't want to send your kid to a school where only 3% can do math at grade level and is a Crip school. You're shafted. You have no choice. One party feels that you should be compelled to go to a school whether you can do the math or not, whether other kids can do the math or not, whether there's a violence problem or not, it doesn't matter. They are compelling you to go there. That alone ought to have people reconsider their allegiance to that particular party. That alone ought to cause BLEXIT. I would love to say that the 3 so-called black leaders who are the most prominent in this country are Candace Owens, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams. But if you subscribe to Ebony magazine, you know, every year they have something called the 100 plus most influential black Americans, and every year you will not find Walter Williams. Every year you will not find Thomas Sowell. You won't even find Clarence Thomas. So a lot of young black people are completely unaware of who these leaders are. Don't even know who Thomas Sowell is. Don't even know who Walter Williams is. Walter Williams, to my knowledge, is the first and only black person to be the chair of an economics department of a non-black university. Thomas Sowell has written over 40 books, including 2 about his trips around the world where he examined virtually every culture, every people, to find out why some succeed and why some don't. And the answer primarily is cultural capital, the willingness to believe in yourself and to live in a political system where you have economic and political freedom. We have that here. That's why people are braving shark-infested waters to come over here, to get to America. The world has 7 billion people. I dare say if they could snap their fingers and trade places with us, most of them would. And here we are whining and complaining about systemic racism, institutional racism, structural racism, and now foundational racism. Are you smoking something? And we have to battle, of course, our left-wing media. These people are relentless in arguing that black people are victims. Black people are persecuted. I was on Fox and Friends one morning, and we were talking about the #1 problem facing the country, and that's, as I said, lack of fathers in the home, irrespective of race. This is a problem that cuts across all races. And I said, even during slavery, a black kid was more likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than today. I get back to my office, I look at my smartphone, Mediaite, which is one of the left-wing organizations that covers conservatives on media, headline, Elder says blacks better off during slavery. Really? This is what we're up against. Now, I mentioned that I would like to say that the 3 prominent leaders are Candace Owens, Thomas Sowell, and Walter Williams. I can't, because if you look at the media, the leaders most frequently quoted, so-called leaders, are Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Louis Farrakhan. There's a book that's out of print now about Jesse Jackson called Thunder in America. Thunder was the nickname that the Secret Service gave him when he ran for president. Jesse Jackson was raised in South Carolina. And when he was raised, his mother was a teenager who was impregnated by the married man who lived next door. When Jesse Jackson was raised, he was teased because it was rare for a kid not to have a mother and father in the home. And he was taunted, Jesse ain't got no daddy, Jesse ain't got no daddy. I am convinced that one of the reasons this man cannot see the tremendous racial progress we've made is because of the pain he experienced when he was growing up. I'm not a psychologist, but if I were, that's what I would argue. Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan's mother was estranged from her husband, had a boyfriend, briefly took back up with the husband, didn't want the boyfriend to know, took out a coat hanger and tried to abort who became Louis Farrakhan. Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton had a very comfortable, nice middle-class life until his father abandoned the family down to the hood. These 3 men all had either non-existent or difficult relationships with their own fathers. That's what they ought to be talking about. Instead, it's racism this, racism that, racism this. By the way, they're all multimillionaires. How does that happen? Al Sharpton, according to the New York Times a few years ago, owed $5 million in taxes. How much jack do you have to earn to owe $5 million in taxes? But we're all talking about institutional racism, systemic racism, and structural racism. It is a con. It is a con to make sure that 95% of Democrats line up like lemmings and pull that lever for the Democratic Party. 95% of blacks line up like lemmings and pull the lever for the Democratic Party. It's a con. It is a lie. And what you hear constantly, watching these primaries, is all this discussion about the police brutality and racism against black people. It's not like this hasn't been studied. Every 2 or 3 years, there's something called the Police Public Contact Survey. Look it up. Tens of thousands of Americans are asked, in the last year, did you have an interaction with the police? If so, what is your race? What is your sex? How were you treated? What happened? They can't find any pattern of police misconduct. Are there individual cops who are bad? Of course. Individual doctors, individual lawyers, individual talk show hosts. But is it institutional? It's been studied. There is a black economist. He teaches at Harvard. He is so brilliant, he became the youngest tenured professor in the history of Harvard, and Harvard is the oldest university in the country. His name is Roland Fryer. And because of these high-profile cases, Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, he assumed that the police were disproportionately using deadly force against black people. So he decided to do a comprehensive study to find out. He said the results were the most shocking of my career. Not only did he not find any so-called institutional racism, he found that cops were more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect, even more hesitant on a Hispanic suspect. Probably because they're deathly afraid of being called racist, and they know that it's going to be scrutinized by the media like nobody's business. It is simply not true. I'm in Los Angeles, and years ago, the ACLU demanded that cops, when they pull over somebody, write down the race of the driver. They had never done that before. And the idea was that the ACLU assumed that cops were pulling over black people disproportionately and also illegally for no reason. So now we have all this data, and it turns out that blacks are pulled over more often than our white drivers. And according to a study done in 2013 during the Obama administration, by the National Institutes of Justice, which is the research arm for the DOJ, it turns out 75% of black motorists admitted that they were committing some sort of traffic offense when they were stopped. It also turns out that you name the offense, whether it's speeding, whether it's driving without a license, driving without a seatbelt, driving without headlights, you name the offense, a black person is more likely to commit it. That's why. Now, isn't that good news that you're not being pulled over just because you're black? Yet when I give these stats, I get all this hostility from people, depending upon the audience. Isn't this good news? Isn't it good news that Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, the Democratic Party are wrong when they make these arguments about police officers? Isn't that good news? My goodness, we live in America, for crying out loud. When I was born, Jackie Robinson had been playing in the major leagues just 4 years. There were 13 states where it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry. There were 2 people in Congress who were black, none in the Senate, no governors. And yet in 1940, 87% of blacks lived below the federally defined level of poverty. By 1960, that number had declined to 47%. A 40-point drop over 20 years, the largest period of economic prosperity for blacks in the history of this country. Can anybody argue that we're more racist now than then? How were they able to do that? How did that happen? Working hard, staying focused, embracing your family, embracing God. That's what kept us together. Nobody could have had a hand dealt worse than my father, or very few people. My father was 13 years old, born in Athens, Georgia, during the Jim Crow South. And my father had a mother who could neither read nor write. My father doesn't know his birth date because he was born in the back of a room. And his mother, because she was illiterate, couldn't write down his birth date in the Bible. So my dad knows the year, doesn't know the date. My dad enrolled in school. The lady said, "What day were you born?" He said, "I don't know." She wrote down May 25, which was her birthday. So I told my dad he has a 1 in 365 chance of it actually being the right date. My father came home at the age of 13 and had a quarrel with his mother's then boyfriend. She had a series of men in her life. My last name is Elder. My dad told me that Elder was not his biological father. I said, "Who's your biological father?" My dad said, "I never met him." My mother had a series of boyfriends, each one, my dad said, more irresponsible than the other one. Elder was an alcoholic, didn't work, and when he did occasionally work, he brought home the money, gave it to my dad's mom. He'd want the money back. She wouldn't give it to him. He beat the crap out of her. My dad would jump in. He beat the crap out of him. This is my dad's life. 13 years old, he's quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. Elder was long gone. And his mother sided with the boyfriend, threw my father out of the house, never to return. You're talking about a black boy, Jim Crow South, at the beginning of the Great Depression, no siblings, going down the road, 8th grade education, never returned home. My father had a series of jobs, and he ultimately became a Pullman porter for the trains. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And he was able to travel all around the country and came to California one time on a stop. And my dad was able to go into a restaurant and actually get served. That blew him away, because in the South he had to have cans of tuna and packages of crackers because he never knew whether or not he was going to be able to get a meal. So my dad kind of made a mental note, maybe someday I'll relocate to California. Pearl Harbor, my dad joins the Marines. I said, Dad, why the Marines? He said 2 reasons. Any Marines out here? 2 reasons. You know what the reasons are? They go where the action is, and they love those uniforms. My dad was stationed on the island of Guam. He was a cook. He was a staff sergeant. My dad could look at a cake, tell you what's in it. Gets out of the Army, goes back to Chattanooga where he had met and married my mom. He goes around the city to get him a job as a short order cook, and he's told, we don't hire niggers. My dad goes to the unemployment office. The lady says, you went through the wrong door. Go through that door. My dad goes out, sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to California to get me a job as a short order cook. Comes out to California. We're talking about 1945, 1946. Walks around for a day and a half. I'm sorry, you have no references. My dad said, I cooked for thousands of people in World War II in GI. You have no references. They treated him the same way they treated him in Chattanooga, a little more polite about it. Went to an unemployment office, this time just one door. My dad sat there for a day and a half. Lady calls him up, says, I have something for you, sir. I'm not sure whether you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. What is it? It's a job cleaning toilets and Nabisco brand bread. My dad did that for 10 years, took a second job with another bread company cleaning toilets, went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED, and cooked for a family on weekends from time to time to make additional money. The man never slept. That's why he was so grouchy all the time. And when my father had this conversation where I found out about his life, it was an 8-hour conversation because I didn't like him. I thought he was an ogre. I thought he had a trigger temper. He used to get mad all the time. I now realize he never slept. 15 minutes here, hour here, 45 minutes here. You do that not day after day, but week after week, month after month, year after year, and you walk into a household with 3 rambunctious boys, how are you going to feel? So as my dad's telling me this, my dad got bigger and bigger and bigger, and Larry got smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally I said, Dad, I am so sorry I judged you so harshly. And my father says, don't be. You just didn't know. But follow the advice I've always given you and your brothers. Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you moan and groan about what somebody did to you, go to your nearest mirror, look at it, and say, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my father said, no matter how hard you work, no matter how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen to you. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. I wrote a book about it. It's called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, about this 8-hour conversation you ever like to take out. Let me just leave you with this. A few months ago, I'm at a gas station. I get out. I had a nice suit on, late model car, credit card, filling up my car to get premium gas. Up to the next to me pulls up a 1968 Dodge Polara, busted muffler. 2 guys get out, pale skin. I can tell they're father son because they resemble each other. Maybe collectively they might have 8 to 10 teeth collectively. Southern license plate, won't tell you license plate. They get $5 of regular, and they motor out. And I'm standing there watching them leave, and I said to myself, just think, those 2 dudes owe me reparations. Is this a great country or what? God bless you. God bless BLEXIT. God bless Candace Owens. God bless America. I love you. Thank you so much.